National Fishermen and Pacific Marine Expo are proud supporters of the Galley Stories podcast, as we make similar efforts to highlight the people and topics that define commercial fishing. You can see what that looks like in print and online all year long, as well as every November in Seattle when this community comes together at PME. Check out nationalfisherman.com and pacificmarineexpo.com to learn more.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Alaska Brewing Company out of Juneau, Alaska. Go check out their new Wild Ness beer. Launched on March 1st, any place that you got a good retailer near you or your favorite watering hole. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, welcome back to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond. I am your host, Mark Kaler. Today we're going to go off script a little bit from our normal range of episodes to honor an individual that has been a big part of my life, a big part of my success in life, I should say. But Chuck Hardin Bundrant, CHB, as a lot of people call him. He died on October 17th of 2021, so I was never able to capture his story. So to go back to that, I thought I would get some of his closest friends and family to let you know a little bit something about this guy. So the next portion of this you're going to hear is them sharing their experiences about Chuck and some of their interactions with Chuck. And also, just to point out, he was honored on the Senate floor by Senator Murkowski after his death. A 13-minute video explaining what he's done for seafood and for Alaska. So I suggest you guys follow that link down below.
Vic Scheibert here, been with Trident 45 years. I first met Chuck in 1974 when I came down to Seattle after working for Vita Seafoods and applied for a job. He had a small office on the foot of 28th Street where he and Mike Jacobson each had a desk in there, and they were the only two people in the office. Everybody else worked on the Billiken back then. That's when I first met him.
And what was that experience like? What can you tell us about him?
Chuck was the captain of the Billiken back then when we only had the one boat and the company started, and he was a pretty tough captain. He was a real driver, he was real fair, but he was a real tough guy to work for. Had a lot of experiences with him on the Billiken. One of my most notable experiences was that because the Billiken was a catcher processor, we were able to stay out at sea quite a bit longer than a regular fishing boat would. So we'd go into Port Moller and anchor up, and a small freighter, the Dolphin, would come out and supply us with packaging material and fresh water and fuel and different supplies to keep us going. Then we'd go back out, and I think we went in and out of Port Moller 2 or 3 times before we actually got to go back to Dutch Harbor and actually get off the boat. So we ended up spending 97 days on that thing without getting off. And Chuck was the captain back then. He did the same thing with us. But I'd say that's the closest time in my life where I was wondering if I was going to be mentally sane by the time I got off that thing. But it was quite an experience, and we often looked back on it together and laughed about it, but it was pretty crazy.
If you, obviously Chuck's no longer with us and I can't get his story, what do you think he would want Vic to say about him?
I think the biggest thing about Chuck is I think he is, even though he's a really tough guy, he did have a heart of gold, and he cared about people. He really did. He did a lot of generous things for people that, were with him and loyal to him.
Hi, this is Casey McManus, or sometimes known as Captain Casey from Deadliest Catch. Used to be from Deadliest Catch anyway. A start which I can very much say came from my dad and Chuck. I was blessed to be in Chuck's presence pretty much my whole life. My dad was with him since the late 80s in Trident Seafoods, and I kind of got brought in as a helper and a kid and a family friend to do projects, and it turned into a job later on at the old yard and out on the boats, engineering. And then I moved on into a port engineering role when I was home from fishing. And, I think I can attribute a lot of that to not only my dad, but Chuck. Chuck was a guy who could spot something in people. He could spot loyalty, and he would try to give people opportunities that he knew were loyal, that he could help grow and do more for him and the company, and help that that person climb the ladder at the same time. I remember later on, I chiefed on the Billiken for 8 years or so, 8.5 years. And that was the flagship of Trident. And at the end of it, I was kind of burned out of just that one boat and getting my butt kicked every day on deck. And I had an opportunity to jump on the Cornelia Marie as the captain and buy into that. And I took it. And I remember the hardest thing I ever had to do at Trident Seafoods was tell Chuck I quit. And to tell a guy you quit that did so much for you it just breaks your heart. There's no other way to say it. And, I thought he'd be angry with me or disappointed in me. And he smiled and he shook my hand. He gave me a big hug. And he said, if stuff goes sideways, if you need a partner, give me a call. The answer is yes. So that kind of tells you in a nutshell the type of guy that Chuck was. In his later years, as Parkinson's began to take hold of him a little bit and he started slowing down a little physically, once again, I was blessed to be in his presence to be able to help him as I was available on the physical side and help him out, and got to explore, different places in Alaska with him continuously and just spend time with him. And I can say one of the most important things about Chuck, everybody he ever met or saw, whether it be at a plant or at church or just out and about in town, he would always take the time to make a connection with each person and shake their hand, look them in the eye, and if they were an employee of his, he would always thank them for what they do for him, because he knows that he wouldn't be where he was without that many people trying their hardest below him. So he was a hell of a leader, a hell of a good guy, and I'm starting to see now as Joe, don't shoot me for saying this, but as Joe's getting a little older, you see so much of his dad in him in so many ways, and for me, it's I really enjoy seeing that, and I enjoy seeing his drive and where to take the company. But when it all comes down to it, it's basically one word, and it was blessed to be with him, and blessed to share time with him, and if there's one thing that God screwed up when he created this world is he didn't include visiting hours for heaven.
My name is David Ross. I've been with Trident now for a little over 40 years. Chuck Bundrant. First time I met him would be on the Tempest, probably in 1982. And I had started as an engineer on that vessel, and I was talking with the chief and, kind of asked about a pay raise and stuff. He said, well, the owner happened to be on board up with Smitty up in the bridge. He said, why don't you go talk to him? So, what the hell? Why not? So, charged up to the bridge, and Chuck and Diane and Smitty were up there, and introduced myself and said, I'd like to kind of have a raise as possible. I'd been there for a few months and thought I was doing a pretty good job. So I'll never forget, he looked at me and kind of shocked the hell out of me. He says, well, do you think you're worth it? And I thought, well, hell yeah, I'm worth it. So he looked at Diane and says, well, don't you give this man a raise? So I said, thank you very much. So it was kind of cool, and then from there it was just some of the memories with Chuck, working on the boats. We didn't see him that much. He'd come out during the bay up here in Bristol Bay and get around to every boat and see every year, Didn't have much interaction with him except at the Christmas parties. Remember him up on a piano there. We'd hoop it up pretty good. There wasn't very many people with Trident back then. We fit in a pretty small room, and he'd hand us all a turkey on the way out. And Mike Jacobson would take me to a Sonics game, so we got out of there. But yeah, he was something to see when he got out of that helicopter, when he would land on the Sea Alaska and throw his hat down. Why he threw his hat down on the deck, I don't know. He'd get out of that helicopter, something was going on, and he'd throw his hat down. Then he'd pick it up, come charging in, and he wanted to know what the hell was going on, why we weren't, freezing fish. And I stood there and said, this was our problem, and we're on it. And he said, okay. He was pretty cool about it. He stood behind you. He supported me throughout my whole career. He was great. I really enjoyed working for him. It was definitely a tight-knit family. There were some hard times. We would clean up used fittings because we couldn't afford. He was a great man. Would have done anything for him. And he did a lot for me and supported me in my career and believed in me and took you under his arm and basically made you feel part of the family. It was great, great experience. Never thought I would be at one company for so long, but it was a heck of a ride. It was fun. Miss him dearly, and that's about all I gotta say.
Hi, this is Brian Parsons, and I just wanted to kind of go over some of my first recollections of Chuck. As I was processing seafood on the Sea Alaska in 1989 in Bristol Bay, and the fact that Chuck came around at the end of the season and shook everybody's hand on the whole boat really spoke volumes to me, and it's something that created a loyalty over the years that I carried with me, and have had the pleasure of doing many, many things with the company, from running offices to working on boats to doing the stock room in the store in Sandpoint, and just whatever was needed. I always felt that it was appreciated with the company, and working, particularly with Chuck and Diane, who always believed in me and supported me and made a path for me in my career, is something that I will never forget, and I honor so much, especially as I'm winding down my years with the company. So anyway, that's just a little small testimonial for me, and something that I wanted to say that has meant so much to me over the years. And one more thing is an anecdote that I used to tell people over the years, that Chuck always demanded such loyalty from all his people, and we were always willing to do pretty much anything he asked. And a funny story was, if Chuck and I were standing on the dock and he told me to jump in the water, I would most certainly jump in the water. But after I crawled back up the ladder, I would certainly ask him why the hell he had me jump. So that's just another little nugget.
Hi, my name is Diane Miller. I've worked for Trident Seafoods for about 32 years. As I sit here reminiscing about the summer of 1992, I can't help but be overwhelmed with a flood of emotion. It feels like yesterday when I met Chuck and Naknek. I was walking down the hill with the superintendent. He introduced me as the row lady. Chuck looked at me with that warm smile, and he looked at me and goes, "How old are you?" When I told him I was 32 at the time, we both laughed. Little did I know, our paths crossing that day would lead to something so profound and life-changing. About a week later, my father passed away. Diane and Chuck called me into the office and told me that don't worry about anything, just get on that plane, head home, do what you need to do. Your job is always here. I never expected that from an owner of a company. Their compassion and kindness touched my heart deeply, and I realized soon that they did this for a lot of people, demonstrating the true measure of Chuck's character. Chuck was a man with a gentle heart, yet when it came to business, he was fierce and unstoppable. I witnessed firsthand the determination and how Trident transformed and adapted quickly. I recall a time when Chuck called us into the office, my boss Mitch and I, and told us, "You're going to be responsible for doing Trident Row. We will not bring other companies in to do what we can do." I looked at him and I said, "I don't think we can do that." He looked back at me and he says, "Take the word can't out of your vocabulary." And from that day, I do not say I can't do something. I will say I will try. We did it the following summer. It was unbelievable. We had 3 processing boats, 2 plants in North Naknek, South Naknek, and we were doing Trident brand Sujiko Row. We did it. We could. We will. My husband and I, Jim, got married in Hawaii, and soon we began to return to Hawaii each and every year. And pretty soon, Chuck and Diane invited us over to their house for dinners, and we became part of the Trident family, which was definitely an honor. And to this day, it just touches our hearts. Chuck, your spirit, your vision, and your dedication to family and community are beyond compare. Your legacy lives on through the Bundrant family, who continue to make the difference and inspire those around them. Being part of the Trident family is an honor and a privilege that fills us with humility. You've left an indelible mark on my heart, and I will forever be grateful to the time we had together. Your friendship, support, and unwavering belief in people will always be remembered and cherished. Thank you, Chuck, for everything, and thank you, Diane, Joe, and the Bundrant family. We love you. Thank you.
Hey, my name is Dave Abbassian. I've been working for Trident Seafood since June 15 of 1986. I've been asked to share a couple of my Chuck Bundrant stories, and there's 2 specific ones that always comes up in my mind, but I might throw in a few more too. The first story begins when I was waiting for my job interview with Trident Seafoods. It was early May of 1986. Our offices were in the old yard, in the vans, the trailers. And I'm sitting all by myself, waiting for my interview. And this guy walks in the trailer, and he was wearing a 3-piece suit. And he looks at me, and I'm sitting down. He looks down at me and says, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Dave Abbassian, applying for work in Alaska." And he looks at me and he says, "You ever worked up in Alaska?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough work. You think you can make it?" And I said, "I don't know, but I'm going to try my best." And he walked on to wherever it was going. Never knew who this guy was. And I did my interview. I was hired to come up to Akitan to be a part-time cook in the mess hall and a seafood processor. And so June 15, 1986, I arrived in Dutch Harbor. The airport back then was quite different than what it is now. In fact, I was the only person there. It was me and the goose pilot at the time, Tom Madsen. And he sees this lost kid in the airport, so he comes up to me and he says, where are you trying to go? I said, I'm trying to go to Akitan. He says, well, I'm the guy that usually takes people to Akitan, but I'm not flying there today. But I'll call the office over there and tell them you're here. So I'm hanging out in the airport, and Tim, the helicopter pilot, and his helicopter, and a couple Japanese buyers come and drop the Japanese buyers off at the airport and picks me up and takes me back to Akitan. So I'm walking down on the dock, and there's a bunch of boats, 4, 5, 6 deep, and they were processing false pass salmon, and they were pretty backed up. So before I know it, as soon as they gave me my room assignment, they gave me rain gear and boots, and next thing I know, I'm down on the salmon line cleaning fish. First time ever doing it. And the guy that was standing next to me, and he says, "You're new, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I just got here today." He said, "Well, you see that guy over there?" Points out to this guy in the rain gear. He says, "If he's over here, make sure you're not messing around, because he's the owner, and he doesn't like lazy people." And I said, "Oh, okay." So the guy eventually came to where I was working, and I looked at him, oh man, I've seen this guy somewhere before. Chuck always had that distinct facial hair, right? And I finally figured out who it was. It was the same guy in the 3-piece suit months later, or months earlier, in the trailer, when he came and asked me who I was. And so here I am, sliming salmon away, and the owner of the company that I've just started working for is right there next to his troops in his extra tough boots and gloves and cleaning fish and helping to process the fish. I was so impressed. And I remember at that moment I said, I don't know where I am, but I know I'm in a good place. And from that moment on, every experience I've had with Chuck was always the same. Great motivator, great leader, very demanding, but treated everybody with respect, and he valued loyalty so much. And speaking of loyalty, it leads me on to my next story. The next story I'm going to share is, it was late 80s, 88, 89. Chuck and his team had been trying to convince Long John Silver's to start serving wild Alaska pollock on their menu. And all they wanted was cod. And so he decided to get these guys up to Akitan to show them what a great fish wild Alaska pollock actually is. And at the time, we were just in the design stages of our current pollock plant. So we had 2 small pollock lines in the cod plant that were processing pollock and trying to get some IQF out of it and so forth. So he brings the Long John Silver's group, and he asks me if I can cook some wild Alaska pollock for these guys several different ways. I've been trying to get these guys to buy this fish, and they keep saying no because they want cod. So I said, no problem. So I whipped out a few different dishes, and one of the naysayers in the Long John Silver's group said, "Yeah, this is great fish, but this is fresh fish. We want to try frozen fish." And then I told them that was made out of frozen fish. They didn't believe it. So I went and grabbed some frozen fish and thawed it out in front of them, cooked it again. And Chuck later on told me that right after that meal, Long John Silver signed a $6 million contract with Trident Seafoods to introduce wild Alaska pollock to the domestic market for the first time. The loyalty part of it comes in the next morning as they're getting ready to leave. They're having breakfast in the mess hall. So I'm standing next to Chuck, and the president of Long John Silver's looks at me, gives me his business card, and says, anytime you want to work for my company, here's my number, you got a job. And I looked at him and I said, much appreciated, but I'm perfectly happy over here. And what that made Chuck feel was priceless. And I don't think he ever forgot that to the very end, that he was stood proud in front of his customers, showing that not only he's able to provide them what they want, but he's got perfectly happy employees behind him. So those are my two main stories. But the last one I'm going to remember is that I want to share. That is that he always loved coming to his fish processing plants in Alaska. And towards the end, when he was not as strong, he made it once a year instead of twice a year. But every summer, he would go tour all the plants, and the amount of energy that his presence would bring to every plant was incredible. I've never seen an individual that could have so much effect on people that worked for him. His last visit to Akitan will always stay vivid in my memory. He had a very difficult time walking, getting around. We used the crane to lift him up to the warehouse door because he was adamant that he wanted to go on the factory floor and see his people and see the fish. And we did it. And I don't know how he pulled it off, but after he finished walking, he was really exhausted. So he asked if he could sit in the break room. And so we got him a chair, and it happened to coincide with the factory going on break moments later. And as soon as people realized Chuck was in the break room, the word got around, and there was a line of people. This process took about 45 minutes, if not an hour. There was a line of people that stood in file in the line, and one by one, they went over there and shook his hand. Many took pictures with him, and the look on Chuck's face was priceless. And then I was standing over there watching this in action, and feeling so proud of being part of organization that he put together for a guy to be idled by so many people, justifiably so. And after 20 minutes, one of the supervisors came up to me and says, "Boss, the break is over. We got to go back in the factory." And I told him, "I think we're going to be taking a longer break today." And it took about 1 hour for everybody to go through the line, shake his hand, take pictures of him. I will miss him forever. I think of him every day when I look at what he's built and put together. And yeah, it's a great man. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jim McManus. I worked for Chuck for many years. We go back, the first time that we crossed paths, I should say, is in about 1974, probably when he brought the Billiken back from Alaska. And I was working as a Caterpillar mechanic at NC Marine. And he pulled into the dock, and it was like he was the talk. He was the talk of the town. He was the talk of the dock because he had taken that boat and he'd done something that nobody had really done before in that manner, and he put a processor on board and went up and caught king crab and basically paid for the boat in 1 year, making what they call bricks of gold, which is just fancy legs frozen in a little box about the size of a banana bread pan. And I never did formally meet him at that time. It was more like, there's that guy. There's that guy that people are talking about. And the boat was big. It was beautiful. It was bigger than any other crab boat that we'd had in there. And I never in a million years dreamed that I would work for him at all. I was enjoying being a Caterpillar mechanic and working with my hands. And so time went on, a couple of years passed, and I had a couple of friends of mine that were crab fishermen as well, and their dads had crab boats, and they just kept coming in, after a couple of years and working on their boats and tying up to our dock and driving a new car about every time, and said, Jim, you got to go fishing. You just got to go fishing. You'd be a good engineer. You're exactly the type of guy that would do well. And I got a good offer from a Norwegian gentleman, and I did go after about 3 years. So I started fishing crab in the 70s, and we brought crab into Akutan. At that time, there was a multitude of floater processors in the bay, and Chuck had the only shore plant there, and he had a vessel tied alongside called the Mr. J, and my captain Gunleif and Chuck were friends from Kodiak, and ironically, it was something to see him there and see what he had started to grow there at that time. It was pretty, it wasn't a big operation, but as time went on, I had operated boats for Corey Ness, and Chuck was partners in one of them, and operated a multitude of his boats. And we brought some of the first pollock into Akutan as they built the shore plant, and if not first, and on the Columbia, and codfish. And just to watch that plant grow from there to the size it is today and the hurdles that they had to go through was really something. And then in about 1991, Corey Ness was ready to retire and take some time for himself, and he asked me if I'd like to take his place there. Not obviously in an ownership role or that type of role, but in being responsible for the fishing fleet and growing the fishing fleet. And there was a vision that the fishery was, probably going to be privatized. And the more that we had under our belt, the more that we owned, the better off we'd be. And so we grew the fleet from 5 or 6 boats. I think when I retired, we had upwards of 16, and we obviously were limited, and but the company continued to grow. And I remember, as I got involved with the company, I remember the growth pattern of its, what it would gross. And Chuck had these visions of these big numbers way ahead. I'm just going, oh my gosh, you're wondering to yourself, can we really do that? But as a team, there were so many good people that surrounded him, and people just put their head down. They just didn't do one job. He did multiple jobs, and he just tried to cover all bases and keep the train on the tracks. And it just was a marvelous career. A couple of stories that come to mind for Chuck and I. Chuck and I and Diane were in Bristol Bay on the front lines there for several years in the 90s together. And Diane was up front and taking care of fishermen and doing the bookkeeping and just in general watching everything and handling the phone lines and a lot more than that, but that's kind of what people saw. Chuck and I were in the back office, and we just kept it going 24/7. I'd sleep in there on the floor at night, grab the radios, and was up most of the day too, because you didn't sleep around Chuck, and there's only about 3 hours of darkness up in Bristol Bay at that time of year. But anyway, one time he left in the chopper and he went up to one of the rivers. There was an issue up there that was pretty heated, and I know he was heated over it. But Chuck and I always had a way of squelching things at the right time, or whatnot with humor. And he was pretty clever about pulling a good one on you if you had pulled one on him. But he came back in the chopper after a couple hours being out, and he just madder than a dickens, and he come in. I know when he would throw his hat on the floor and kick it, that was about the limit. Well, I had gone down and to the weight room, and every morning there was a guy that used to bring us a newspaper and donuts, and I used to set him on these 10-pound weights and put the newspaper on there, and we just work out. When we get frustrated, we just grab the weights and start pumping them and chill out a little bit. Well, he come in, and he threw his hat down on the floor, and he threw that newspaper off the side, and I'd gone down to the weight room, and I'd replaced those 10-pound weights with 40-pound weights. And he grabbed them, and it took him right to the deck. and he was so angry at the time, but he looked at me like, that was a good one, but I'm going to get you back. I don't remember how it ended, quite frankly, because I left immediately to walk the dog. And but as time went on, so there was most of them, and I retired probably pretty close after, maybe a little bit after Chuck started getting ill. And so retired from being on the front lines and being active to more of an advisory role. And then after that, was blessed to be on the board, still blessed to be on the board, I should say. But in that 10 years, being really close to Chuck, you got to see more and more of the man of who he was. And he's the hardest working man I've ever seen, always thinking ahead. And right up to his last days, when you went for a car ride or something like that, he would point ahead which way, he wanted to turn. He knew where he was going. He knew how to get there. And it was just always, always, always thinking ahead. And whatever he could do to get to his goal, was ethically due. He worked hard to get there. And when I helped him on this little boat, we built a boat in 2010. It was actually the hardest thing we've ever done for Chuck with all the things that we did, but had a little 42-foot catamaran, and it's called Lani Kai, and we fished Southeast Alaska with it, took it back and forth occasionally, and just had a ball with it. But he always, and we tie up to the Annandale, thank God for those guys and the crew to clean the fish and to help us with food and fuel and all that. It made it a lot easier, but it was still a lot of work, and you had to be on the ball with the boss and thinking ahead. So long hours, but he always seemed to stay up longer than anybody. I'd help get the bunk and all that, turn him around, and then I'd go upstairs and lay down, and I slept on a little bench up in the wheelhouse for all those years, and I could hear him down there wrestling around, whether it's on the cell phone, plugging it in to charge it, or whatnot. I was listening to him. And I knew we were going to be up at about 4 in the morning, and it was probably between 11 and midnight by the time he got to bed or hit the bunk. And so I always wanted him to think that I was up later than him. So I'd lay in my sleeping bag on that cot or that bench up there, and I'd take my extra tough and I'd put it on my chest. As soon as he was quiet for about 2 minutes, and I make sure he was just about ready to zone out, I'd take that extra tough off my chest and I'd drop it on the floor, which is right above his head. And then that way he'd think I was still up working. And then he would probably sleep better knowing that I was up later than he was. But anyway, that was one of the good stories. One of the most rewarding times, about 3 years ago now, it'll be 3 years this July, we were in Akitan, and at that time we had to just virtually carry him through the plant, but there was no way that he would not go say hi to the people and greet the people that had helped him get where he was. And it was really touching. So there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people working in that plant, and they took a break to, we were sitting in the break room in Akitan, and they came in to have cookies and coffee in their 15-minute break of their work shift, and they'd come through in sections, and a few people would filter in. Then the word got out that Mr. Bundrant was in there, and he was shaking hands, even post-COVID, but he wanted to greet everybody. And he was sitting there, and we filmed it, and it's just awesome to see the people come up and hug him and shake his hand and do selfies. It was just one after the other. And then divisions of the crew that really didn't come to that break room, like the engineering crew or whatnot, other folks around the plant, dock or whatnot, they all got in line to greet him. And it just showed how much he meant to them. We had one lady come up and say that she was so thankful that she was able to buy her parents a house in Ukraine. And that was just so touching. But he would mean a lot to the person that was on the lines, that was at the incinerator burning garbage, that was running the show there. They would mean the same to him, and he would mean the same to them. He just touched everybody, and just a superman of integrity. And yeah, it was a blessing to be a part of his life. So, and honorable, and just a good man. So I think we'll leave it at that.
Thanks for listening to Galley Stories. We hope you like what the net brought in. Please leave us a review on iTunes. Whether you like it or not, we're not fishing for compliments. Look us up on Facebook and Twitter too, and reach out to us at galleystories@gmail.com.